I could get you to take your seats, there'll be time enough for chatting when the ice cream is served. And that's coming soon, right after this panel. So if I can get you to take your seats, we're going to continue, please. Our next panel is Tracking Russian Financial Assets, Waging War Through Financial, Economic, and Business Means. We have Alex Cooley moderating, Devin Pendleton, Giacomo Tognini, and Kevin Hall as our guests, and we're going to get out of the way because I'm looking forward to this conversation. Please take it away.
Thanks very much. So, okay, tracking Russian financial assets before ice cream. Let's see how this works out.
So much better.
That's right. My name is Alex Cooley. I'm a professor of political science at Barnard College. Till recently, I also directed Columbia University's Harriman Institute for the Study of Russia, Eurasia, and Eastern Europe, where we established a number of research initiatives on the topic of the day, which is tracking Russian financial assets, but kleptocracy more broadly, how we should think about it, how do we understand it, how do we go about researching it. And just by way of introduction, I'd like to make sort of three very brief framing points about our topic before we launch into some of the specific things on our agenda. First is, even before the sanctions were imposed on oligarchs, I would say over the last 5 years, there's been a complete shift in the way we study corruption, certainly in the academy, but also, I think, in investigations. And we used to think of corruption as being located over there in corrupt countries, right? We would have rankings. We still have rankings that would tell us which countries are clean, which countries are corrupt, who needs to clean up their act. And every December, these indices would come out. Now we're seeing many more connections between the quote-unquote clean and the quote-unquote corrupt countries, right? And what we're looking at are transnational networks that link the two, as well as certain actors who are involved. Second point I want to make is in places like Russia or a lot of, say, the former Soviet states of Eurasia, when we talk about oligarchs and elites and their need to use the West and use these transnational networks, they do so because institutions and politics in that part of the world tend to be relatively uncertain and weak, right? And so if you have laundered money, if you have extracted wealth, either legally or in that in-between space that was the 1990s privatization and takeover of state assets, you need to find somewhere to store that wealth. You need the rule of law protection and the property rights protections in somewhere where you're not going to lose everything overnight, right? Should the government change? Should you lose a disastrous war? Should your inner circle turn on you? Your assets need to be safe. That's where the West comes in, right? And that's why Western banks, real estate, luxury goods are important stores of value and guarantees to such elites. And then my third analytical point, over the last couple years especially, we've turned also our attention not so much from on rather the oligarchs themselves, but the enablers within the West that help them to launder their assets and also launder their reputations, right? Laundering assets is the process of taking questionable money and making it legitimate with those property rights guarantees. Laundering reputations is a little trickier, but I would best describe it as sort of recasting yourself from that of a politically exposed person to someone who is viewed as a global philanthropist or a good citizen or even a sort of a cosmopolitan. And again, you have numbers of professions who that assist in both of these dual laundering processes. Law firms, accountants, PR agents, reputation management firms. We'll talk a little bit about those today. So all this to say, when the sanctions were designated on Russian individuals, so-called oligarchs, right after the start of the war, we effectively merged our national security agenda and our anti-kleptocracy and anti-corruption agenda, right? The two became part of the same conversation, in many cases part of the same investigations. What we see now, the Biden administration itself has an anti-corruption strategy, and they have even created a new interagency task force called KleptoCapture, whose remit is to go after these oligarchs' assets. Now, there are lots of things that we could talk about during this session, and hopefully some of you will raise this in the Q&A. The process of designating sanctions. Is there actually any kind of appeal process? Is there any way to get delisted once you're listed? Lots of interesting sort of process issues. But because this is a skills building sessions, we thought we would focus on some of the practical challenges. How do you go about investigating an oligarch, right? And what they have. We see very high profile stories of yacht seizures, right? Aha, Sechen's yacht has been taken, Usmanov's yacht's been taken. But a lot of the other assets are behind the scenes. They're stolen, they're squirreled away, they're hidden behind offshore structures and shell companies. And so one of the things that we've asked this panel to do is, to take us through some of the techniques and some of the new tools that they've designed to investigate Russian oligarchs, but also could be applied to other perpetrators of grand corruption. So our panel today consists of Devin Pendleton from Bloomberg, Giacomo Tonini from Forbes, and Kevin Hall from the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, OCCRP. And we'll just have a couple of rounds of questions and then open it up for your follow-ups and questions to the panel. But first question to all panelists, what do you see as the most important trends and innovations in this area? Maybe could you give us an example of a certain story or certain topic or individual that you worked on and tell us why you think it's instructive. So Devin, let's start with you.
I don't know if I'd call it an innovation so much because it's not like a new technology or anything, but something as simple as looking at share transfers. So much of these billionaires and these very rich people, their assets might be stashed in real estate, diamonds, a super yacht. It's just really difficult to get to the bottom of the beneficial ownership of that asset. But what we can see is a lot of these wealthy people still have publicly traded companies or an interest in a publicly traded company. And one interesting thing we're seeing a flurry of right now is that their interests, or parts of their interests, parts of their stake in a big public company, for example, listed in London, are being moved. They're being moved in the name of their business associate, or they're moving shares to their children, or they're moving shares to their wife or their ex-wife. And you really could see that if you set up something as simple as a alert for their name or their holding company, alert for any kind of share transfers happening at this company by any shareholder. We've captured a lot of really interesting movements because of that. Seeing, oh, who's this guy who owns the biggest gold producer in Russia, which happens to be listed in London? All of a sudden, he's moving shares from a Cyprus holding company to a Malta holding company, for example, or he's moving it from a Cyprus holding company to the BVI. What's going on there? And who is receiving these shares? Who's the recipient? We should be looking at them as well now. You could consider them, participant in a crime.
Great. Giacomo, same to you.
Yeah, building up on off of Devin's point, we found it very useful to look at the beneficial ownership registries, especially in countries and jurisdictions that have long been popular for Russians, so Cyprus, Malta, which Devin mentioned, the Isle of Man as well. And so one example that comes to mind, since also Alex mentioned Usmanov's yacht, was Usmanov's yacht Dilbar, which is said to be the largest in the world. When it was finally seized in Germany, I guess a few weeks ago now, the EU sanctions finally revealed the actual ownership chain, and one of those companies was in Cyprus, ultimately owned by a trust held by Usmanov's sister. So when she was sanctioned, we were able to look at that company, go to Cyprus, look at the annual documents there, and that's all public. You can go into the Cyprus registry and look at that yourself. And there you can sort of dig in and see the movements over the years. So it was in 2020 that Usmanov had transferred this company, which owned the yacht ultimately, Cayman company, to the Cyprus company. And in there you could see he had transferred, I think, 5 other companies as well. One of them owned his jet, which is valued at $300 million. The US also blocked it. Another owned one of the helicopters that landed on Dilbar frequently. And then there was another one which owned another yacht, a smaller yacht, $10.5 million. But if you already have a $600 million yacht, that was kind of small. So it's really interesting to, we knew all of this, right? We knew where they were keeping this money, but now with more time to really dig into these corporate records across these different countries, you can see the strategies that some of these people have taken. Even, with Usmanov, it was 2020, so 2 years before he was sanctioned. And this is something that we've then been tracking, since the invasion started. And like Devin was saying, in terms of the public ownership, also looking at how they're transferring ownership of these private companies. I think it was Abramovich who transferred ownership of a firm to one of his associates on the day of the invasion, which owned a lot of public stock, but it also owned a yacht. So a lot of yacht movements in that as well.
A lot of yacht movements, and again, the tableau is very global in nature and orientation. Kevin, same to you.
Yeah, no, not much. No.
Not much on that?
Easy.
Want to tell us about it?
No, a lot of interesting developments. One of this is it's striking for someone who's been fortunate enough to be in this space since the Panama Papers.
Yeah.
Kind of the evolution with each leak. It's kind of added a wealth of information that's allowed to piece it together. So if you think the oligarchs today, well, who was sanctioned first? You had the Rottenbergs. You had Roldugan, who was found in the cellist with the $100 million cellos that Putin said, was Stradivarius are expensive and things of that sort. And then you've been able to see with each successive leak kind of the steps that have been taken to kind of move things around and build a better mousetrap. So one of the things we're finding now, I won't name because some of you guys may be writing about the same topic, the vessel, but some of these things are owned now by foundations. Well, anybody who's covered this for a while knows there was something called bearer shares where I tell Alex, you're going to hold the shares of my company. Yep. My name will never appear. You have full power of attorney over it. If you wanted to keep my boat, I'm screwed. I'd have to kill you, which is kind of how it happens. Really. Bearer shares have been pretty much outlawed since about 2011, and they were phased out. I think Panama is the last place to get rid of them. Well, these new foundations are kind of having the same effect of kind of making it almost impossible to find out who is owning it, because you can use nominee directors, and there's just so many layers. So I think one of the challenges in this current incarnation of what we're doing is that they're building a better mousetrap, right? So I think we know since 2016 forward, you've had Panama Papers, Pandora Papers. I knew that was going to happen. Let me just turn that off. A person who wants to talk about an oligarch who chose this moment to call. Panama, Pandora, FinCEN Files, Paradise Papers, Open Lux, and more recently Credit Suisse, and then ICIJ had HSBC. So you're talking about a pretty big universe of stuff now that gives us a sense. What is everybody, the Holy Grail? I think a Delaware leaks would be what all of us are kind of slobbering over. The challenge, I'll leave it here in terms of innovation, the challenge is finding an innovative way to crack through U.S. corporate registries. The Open Lux thing that we did last year at OCCRP investigation, Lamond was able to put together a team working with us, and they scraped the corporate public registry, and were able to reconstruct the actual reconstruct a beneficial owner database that wasn't on the front end. If you knew the name of the company, you might be able to find the name of the person who was the owner. They were able to using sleuth technology and good algorithms, were able to reconstruct it so that it was searchable by the beneficial owner. And so one of the things I wrote about was the two Cuban brothers, the Lopez Callejas, who had pretty much lorded over maritime traffic, which is Cuba's lifeline. So there's a lot of cool things you can do that each year is getting better. This is a good news story.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing up Delaware, because when we talked about sort of this convergence of clean and corrupt countries, it's actually specific jurisdictions here in the U.S. that view incorporation as a states' rights issue, right? And these secretaries of states view it as a very kind of political issue. No, we don't have to follow these, FATF guidelines and so forth. It's Delaware, it's Wyoming, South Dakota, Nevada.
It's gotten better some places. Wyoming and Nevada both changed their laws after the Panama Papers. Not perfect, but at least you have real contacts now, not nominee directors who don't exist or companies that hold 600 people that don't exist. So.
Okay, so you've given us an example of an innovation. Let's talk about some of the challenges of working in this space. And Kevin, let's go in reverse order. Let's start with you. Some of this work can be incredibly frustrating as well as rewarding, and can take you in all sorts of places, and you probably interact with many kinds of actors and agents. So why don't you tell us a little bit some of the challenges you face?
Yeah, and I'll keep my comments brief so my colleagues can talk a little bit more on this topic, but I think one of the challenges writ large to journalists is the threats, right? So the EU is threatening to clamp down on Switzerland. In the Swiss secrets that we moved late last year, one of the challenges there had been, or actually, was it this year? It's all a blur now. One of the challenges has been that Switzerland's laws allow prosecution if you have in your possession some of these offshore documents or these Swiss banking documents. Well, that's a pretty big intimidation. So our reporters can't go there now because we've reported on this, and our people there had to take, pretty unique steps to even participate in the project. So I think there's a move in that direction. I think the BVI also has, the British Virgin Islands has very strict rules on what you can possess, and I think the trend is twofold. One is this information is getting leaked out there, and in these countries, it's to even crack down more. So I think that's, I think our biggest challenge going forward is to keep pushing for transparency, especially here.
Great. Jacob, I'm the same to you, some of the challenges.
Yeah, I think a major challenge, especially recently, has been getting a lot of sources to speak on the record. I mean, we've been getting more tips for sure once you write a few stories about the yachts or a certain industry. You have people who will reach out with important information, but then you get sometimes into a dead end where you can find a company and maybe it's owned by an associate of a person, but you're not really sure if you can prove the link. Maybe you can talk to one person who tells you that there's a link there. And it's frustrating because, obviously sometimes maybe that's all there is, but oftentimes then you'll be able to do more reporting later and see that those links are there. But obviously we all have to be rigorous in our reporting and you can't cut corners. But I think especially two things. One, now I think more people are more willing to talk, especially if they used to be sanctions lawyers or used to be working with oligarchs and now have more time to speak with you. But then they're also a bit more afraid of actually doing that and going on the record for a story. So I guess it's a bit of a double-edged sword there, and I'm curious to hear how you all have also dealt with that. But yeah, it's getting more information, and then I guess the added work of trying to verify that, especially because you're dealing with very sensitive topics and people who have been sanctioned but might actually then sue against these sanctions. There might be litigation, so you have to be extra careful.
Yeah. Devin, same to you.
Yeah, I mean, echoing what Kevin and Giacomo said, it's the getting at the transparency, getting sources comfortable to talk to you when it's, at the one hand, they want to be on the right side. They want to be siding with, whoever looks more powerful in this face-off right now, the oligarchs versus the authorities. But at the same time, there's litigation at risk, and that's very nerve-wracking. Not to mention, physical threats. I mean, I think that's not against journalists so much, but against people in the oligarchs' world. I mean, they are very afraid of saying anything against Putin. They cannot outright say anything. I mean, speaking to people who are close to them or close to that world, asking the question, which I'm asking everyone who I can speak to directly or as close as I can get, why can you not condemn Putin? Why can you not just speak out against him directly rather than more obliquely saying something against the war? I mean, they can't even on the most off the record, be transparent about why they can't say something. I mean, we did see a really interesting, in the New York Times, Oleg Tinkov, who's a Russian billionaire, who did really say, in the strongest terms that we've seen, called the war a massacre and absolutely horrifying and bloodshed. And he's now in hiding in an undisclosed location, fearing for his life. So that's just a whole nother level. I think that fear was always there, but it's really at the fore now.
Yeah. Yeah, please.
And to bring this home to business journalists like all of us, and we have a movie that just debuted at the Toronto Film Festival called The Killing of a Journalist, which is about the killing of our reporter in Slovakia who was doing the kind of work you guys do and we do, investigating corruption, investigating, what is it to be an investigative journalist? All journalists are investigative. That's what we do, right? It's not a particular skill set. All of us kind of should be investigative by nature. Anyway, he was killed by, presumably by the people he was investigating. It's a really powerful movie. Our Bulgaria correspondent last year was, there's a new law now that requires the intelligence agencies to notify if an American interest is the target of an assassination or a killing. And so our Bulgaria correspondent was told you need to take steps. We've got credible information that they're going to kill you. He moved to a safe location, published the story quickly under the idea that getting this out there is going to give them a measure of protection. That's what they're trying to stop. But so I think these threats against journalists are real. Daphne Caruana, who was involved in the Panama Papers, was blown up right outside her home in Malta. These are serious people making serious amounts of money through corrupt means, and I think it's tough. One of the things that's particularly challenging, to pick up on the point you had asked earlier, in today's environment is where a lot of us have sources who can go to sources in Russia or in Ukraine. You can't do that now because it's too risky for them to talk to anybody in the West. So there is a bit of an information vacuum, and I assume you guys are finding the same thing as well, that it's too risky to go to people for certain things. There was somebody who could run a passport number for you, or you could check license plates, or there are people who can get things done who you just can't go to right now. So that's one of the challenges as well.
Interesting. And I suppose another challenge related is also the use of the court system and sort of the so-called slap suits. And we've seen that with Catherine Belton in London, so they're sued on behalf of sort of 4 oligarchs and the settlement that they reached. But it seems to me that this also came up during the Mueller probe too, the sort of very deliberate, just checking in with you, just reminding you, that we're here. I'm just curious, though, what's it like to manage this kind of email flow during the day from reputation management companies and PR companies? And do you have any advice on how to do that or how to take it in stride?
I think you always just bear in mind who their client is, that they have a story that they are selling you. They are paid extremely well to sell you this story, and that they have no problem lying to you. Like, they are excellent liars, very comfortable with that, and as are their attorneys too. It is their job to throw you off, and the more hysterical they get, you can feel good that you are chasing the right line of reporting.
That's great advice. Chair Conlon, you want to?
Yeah, I found much of the same. I feel like there's 2 approaches. One, they try to kill you with kindness and call you a lot and try to, say, dangle things, and maybe you'll talk, but then they won't talk, and then feed you these stories. On the other hand, there are people who are very aggressive, sometimes switching between the two. And I think just to follow on to what Devin said, it's just important to remember, you have to be objective, of course, and you have to reach out for comment and get them the chance to tell their side of the story, but also to really, triple check anything they might tell you. And you're not obliged to publish the 2-page letter they send you with all every single objection they might have. So I think, it's trying to find a balance between.
And document everything.
Yeah.
Because these guys are going to find the smallest little thing. I mean, we have a pretty rigorous fact-checking system, and when I was at the Miami Herald, we had a very good lawyer who rigorously checked that, and that's part of the job. Often we reporters get into trouble when newsrooms are cut back and we don't have enough eyes on something. If you got a serious story like this, you need to have a lawyer look at it and make sure. I think that's, there are pro bono lawyers. My organization can work with you. There are a number of organizations, ProPublica, I'm sure, could make somebody available to review something if any of you had a story that was so sensitive and you didn't feel like you were getting your own lawyering. I think that's important. And I think it's just important to also engage. Don't be intimidated by it. There's a guy in Jacksonville, Igor Makarov, who is not yet sanctioned. He's been sanctioned by Australia and Canada, I believe. It's a bit of a challenge keeping track of the multi-level sanctions. He's got a lot of property in the U.S. He's a seafood magnate. He was a former cycling champion. We wrote about him in, I'm trying to remember which leak it was at this point, a couple of years back, and got this kind of threatening call. Turns out the guy had been a reporter at the Miami Herald, and he's calling the Miami Herald on behalf of this guy. That a little bit of chutzpah, but you have to bite your lip and don't engage, don't ignore your tendency to want to get up back in his face and just, put your in writing, get everything in writing, respond in writing, and keep documentation, because there's, a good chance you're going to need it.
All really good advice. Thanks to you all. Okay, so we do have some time for some questions. So let's open it up. And If it's for the whole panel, let us know. If it's for specific panelists, let us know as well. So,
Unless it's from Milwaukee.
yeah. Don't be shy. Yeah, over here.
Yeah, if you don't ask questions, we're going to ask questions of you.
That's right. We're going to set the Russian asset tracker on you. Like,
Hi, I'm Beth Jerfeisen. I am getting my MBA at NYU right now and also working at Crane's New York Business. And something I have continuously run into just like covering everyday like real estate was dealing with shell companies. And I was wondering if you had any advice on like how to get past that to find like the real owners behind things, even just like with deals here in New York City.
yeah, how do we deal with shell companies? Anyone like take a stab at this?
We'll let the New York folks answer first.
Yeah.
One thing you can do, I mean, shell companies unfortunately can be a dead end sometimes. One thing I've found that's helpful is taking the name of that shell company, trying to see if it has been used anywhere else. Any other databases you can run it through, any court filing search, the huge Google universe, basically Nexus, anything you can find. And if you can piece together other properties they own, other businesses they've owned, other places it's been used, you can use it to kind of put together a pattern of who this person might be. So it could be a clue. You might not find the name, but it could be a really useful clue.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think the ICIJ database with all the leaks, sometimes I've been able to, maybe that company won't have who the owner is, but there'll be an associated company, and then you can try to work your way that way. And then sometimes, not always, but they might be registered an address, be it in the US or in another country, and then you can look at other companies registered there, the directors, some of these shell companies owned by the same person share many of the same managers, advisors, and those kinds of people, and then that can be a way to dig into that.
Yeah, that last point was really important, and because I did a story on a guy named Carlos Pollitt, who is the Ecuadorian Comptroller General. He was just indicted about a month and a half ago, finally, and they used all the information that had been in our story, and his name never appeared on, trying to find where you are, his name never actually appeared on any of the properties, but he used a kind of rotating group of members. So you go into Florida Sunbiz, and the first thing I would do if you're looking at someone in New York, look in Miami too, in Florida, because usually they have investments in both places. Sunbiz is very good. You can search by owner. Acris, you can search by owner. The New York Corporation search, you can search by owners. So some states are better than others. Like Giacomo said, ICIJ has that. We have a public-facing thing called Aleph, A-L-E-P-H, and you should be able to do a perfunctory search with that, or you can also ask us. We have researchers who will actually help you and give you access. We have the Cyprus Corporate Database, the California Registry, a whole range of things. That's a tool for journalists, and as a student journalist, I'm sure you could get access as well. You can catch up after on the site, and I can give you a link to that. I buried the lead when you asked about innovation. We have at OCSRP the Russian asset tracker. I'm going to get killed if I don't mention it.
Trying to give you hints
Trying
here.
to hear that, that we started, and we're working with Forbes as part of that, and we've brought collaborators in from around the world to kind of together dig out these sorts of things that you're facing, the problems. And, so if you're hitting a roadblock, but you know that you think it's a Bulgarian or a Slovakian or wherever, there are news organizations through these collaborative journalist organizations that we can link you up with as well. And that's the power of collaborative journalism.
Great. You have a question? Mike? Perfect.
Hi, it's Ken Sweet from the Associated Press. I think the Congressional Research Office put out a report in 2020, said that the 2014 sanctions, the original Obama sanctions, were ultimately not really effective in doing their job because there weren't enough people on board internationally. I'm curious, in your reporting, whether this round of sanctions, because we're going to have the Commerce Secretary tomorrow probably come up and say this time is different. I'm wondering if in your reporting, you're seeing that your sources or these oligarchs are really being pinned down. They really don't have any place to hide their assets or are really getting hit this time. Thanks.
Good question. Then and now? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. One case I think that's interesting to this question is Victor Vekselberg, the aluminum baron and sort of longtime Putin associate as well. He was sanctioned in 2018. Not much really happened. And then about a month ago, his yacht was seized, $90 million yacht in Spain. And if you look at the seizure warrant, the key part to the case against it was that they sanctioned him in 2018, but then time had to pass for him to do things that were against the sanctions, right? Pay for the upkeep of the yacht, transfer money through U.S. bank accounts or U.S. institutions, not bank accounts, sorry, that then transfer money to the yacht. And so I think part of what's been going on now, at least from my reporting, is that we have seen some sort of high-profile actions taken, right? All the real estate being frozen, yachts being seized or frozen as well. But because these people haven't technically committed, I guess a lot of them haven't technically committed any crimes, time needs to pass before they can actually do things, and then authorities can crack down on that. I think also Karimov, his yacht in Fiji, he was one of the ones sanctioned in 2018. So at least from what I've found in my reporting, the key part is that there's actually buy-in from other countries as well. It's the EU, the UK, the US as well. And there's been some sort of lack of coordination on some people, but over time they've come to sanction the same people. So I think the true test of it might be 6 months, a year down the line to see if they've actually violated the sanctions, and then governments can actually go and take that property away from them.
Yeah.
I think so many of these oligarchs, people are actually, they don't consider themselves close to Putin, as they've said again and again and again. So they have spent the last 10, 20 years even trying to move money out of Russia, trying to move it out of his reach, setting it up in London, in the US, and Spain, and Italy, and wherever they can, in the Caribbean. So when sanctions come down in those countries, they really are pinned down. Like, that is a lot of their liquid wealth. Those are a lot of the assets that they use to grow their empire and sustain their empires. So the sanctions really are putting them in a bind, largely. Not the ones that are actually very close to Putin's circle, who are still in Russia. The economy there obviously is hurting them. But the ones who are outside is definitely hurting them. I think the question, too, of course, is is it a success versus 2014? Has it changed anything about Putin's mindset? Are any of these oligarchs putting pressure on Putin? And was Abramovich successful in peace talks? I think no. So in that sense, no.
And what is your metric, right? I think you just touched on it. Is your metric that Putin's still in power? That really wasn't the idea. One of the things where the sanctions have been very effective, even if someone isn't sanctioned, if you're a rich Russian, even if you're not sanctioned, you're getting pretty heavily scrubbed now by any Western financial institution. So they're doing a lot more business in the UAE. So that's one consequence, right? So it's driven them to a place where they have less protection. They get protection from Western authorities, but in terms of protection over their own money and assets, they're losing. They're not going to a stable court system and things of that sort. So that's an important change. The other thing is the offshore. These documents show the level of distrust with Russian to Russian, and one of the fascinating things in the Panama Papers, where other countries, you get a shell company, you don't really know what this is about. A lot of the Russian stuff, it actually said, Company A is forgiving $12 million here. It was all very explicit because they're so used to screwing each other, forgive the vernacular, that they need to have it in writing so it can be arbitrated. And sometimes they're laundering through arbitration as well, which is something that happened here in the United States. So it depends what yardstick you use. If your yardstick is simply Russia's still around, then yeah, sure, that hasn't been effective, and you can make the same argument with Iran too. Has it had consequences? Has it changed behavior? Has it made access to financing more difficult? Most definitely.
Yeah, I think also the stigmatization right now versus 2014 is significant, right? And even you see pleas from people like Deripaska, speaking out against the war. Not that they're part of a theory of change that they can influence Putin. Maybe they had some influence 10 years ago. But I think in general, this crumbling, because this is their currency, social status, right? And when that's taken away from them by all of these different jurisdictions, they're used to being in court, having PR agents, because that's where they're comfortable. That's where their money can buy them social status. So when that's ripped away from them, I would argue it is impacting them. Let's have one more question. Yeah. Wrap up.
Hi, thank you. My name is Diana Lee. I'm also in the NYU's Business Journalism program. And this semester, we actually have a class of investigative reporting with Mike McIntyre, who is a New York Times investigative reporter, and we do a lot of stories about Russian financial assets. And it seems like one of the interesting ways they transfer those assets is through cryptocurrency. So I was wondering, during any of your reporting, have you encountered any stories relevant to that? And is there any effective ways to track through crypto, which is less obvious than traditional currencies? And how are the effective strategies about covering that? Thank you.
Thank you for that. Great question. Also links up to a previous topic. So, anyone with crypto experience here?
Unfortunately, I guess it's not really going to answer your question, but what I found, going back to the topic of Dubai and the UAE, we've talked to a lot of sources there who said that there are more oligarchs and billionaires trying to buy real estate there, but at least, not just, at least in my experience, it seems like the crypto is being more used by wealthy Russians, but not at the sort of oligarch billionaire level, because they're at a sort of age where they don't really trust crypto, so they don't really want to move large amounts of money through crypto, or they're making such large purchases where it might not be feasible for some of these things. If you're buying a $100 million house in Dubai, not that I have any experience in that, but with crypto, it seems like that might be a bit more difficult, and it's sort of more of the younger, wealthy Russians who are using it. But I'm curious to hear if you all found any examples.
Yeah, I think exactly what you said, Giacomo. I think at the era of the oligarchs that we've been focused on are not, they have not put a significant amount of their money into crypto. Like, it's not really going to help them. I think it's kind of too late. But certainly affluent Russians, definitely. And I think the shutdown or discussions of shutdowns of certain exchanges and networks is definitely going to be impactful.
Yeah, I'm going to take a little bit of a contrary view on that, that in fact Russia has been on the front burner on this. If you go back and look at Liberty Reserve, and that was the predecessor to Bitcoin, and what they were trying to do to set this up, they were shut down. Forgetting Arthur's last name now, was operated out of Costa Rica. It has been hand in hand with the criminal underworld, the Russian underworld, with whom many of the oligarchs interface on a somewhat regular basis. I don't think Roman Abramovich has big stakes in crypto, but I wouldn't know either. And that's, there's this universe of unknown unknowns, right? If you look at the places that have become the early adopters for crypto, high-end vehicles, high-end yachts, the art world, and real estate, hello, those are 4 big money laundering centers, right? So I think the concern is legitimate. I think if you look at how the United States has regulated it, anytime anybody has an initial coin offering, it's immediately shut down as an unregistered security. I think we've been, as a government, have been pretty aggressive. I think Gary Gensler at SEC is someone who knows Wall Street well and knows the excesses of Wall Street. I think he's the right guy to kind of lead us into this current era. Maybe a little slower than some people like. Joanna Ossinger, I'm sure, would have much more to say about this than I do. But I do think, I think there's a world that we don't know, right? And Monero, for instance, I can tell you I've been tracking the crypto to the white nationalist groups. And you see stuff, but you're still only seeing part of the picture, and we're still trying to get all the tools. We have a crypto reporter, and I think a lot of other chains are busily hiring them. It's not just Coinbase and Wired anymore. I think it's becoming mainstream as a news organization that you need somebody with that skill set too. Can I make a point on the SLAP? I don't know if we're going to come back to this.
Very quickly, because we're over time.
Okay, I'm going to keep you from ice cream, but I just want to remind people that BuzzFeed News has just fired its entire investigative team. Why are they having financial problems? Well, a big part of their financial problems was the lawsuit for the dossier. Guess what happened? They were sued by Miguel Friedman and two people who were dubbed oligarchs. They had to drop the lawsuit because now they're considered oligarchs, which is what, hey, wake up, the dossier said that. Now, the dossier wasn't perfect, but I think it's a reminder that these people are powerful. If you can inflict big damage on a company like a news feed, you can certainly inflict it on smaller ones around the world. And
yeah, thanks for that. That's important. Even designating someone as an oligarch gets you pushback in a threatening note. Thank you all. This was great. Thank you, Devin. Thank you, Giacomo. Thank you, Kevin. And we'll hand it back over to instructions about the ice cream break.
Excellent panel. One excellent panel after the other. Alex, thank you. That was excellent. And thanks to Giacomo, Kevin, and Devin for your thoughts on that. Folks, we are serving ice cream outside here. We're going to meet back here at 3:30 sharp. We're going to talk to a bunch of bosses, a bunch of top editors of business journalism, and then we're going to head into our award ceremonies and then cocktail hour. So don't overdo it on the ice cream. We'll see you back here at 3:30 sharp.